everyone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Green Apple Books. My name is Cara Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple, and I am really excited to welcome tonight Manjula Martin for the release of her book, The Last Fire Season, A Personal and Pyronatural History. Manjula is joined tonight by Obi Kaufmann. Let's give a hand for both of them. So this is a very special program for many reasons, not only because fire is important to us, it's an important element to us as Californians, not only because we're fans of the California Field Atlas series, and not only because Manjula is a former Green Appler, because the two of their works together is also very important to us, and I'm excited to hear the both of you talk. We're also the last stop on your tour, is that correct?
Yeah.
We're the last stop
really?
on this tour, so we're closing it out with a bang, which is very exciting. So I'm glad to have all of you here. Thank you for joining us both in person and online. Hello, online audience. We appreciate you. We are broadcasting from San Francisco, California. We are on unceded Ramaytush land, and we hope that you join us in our pledge to turn land acknowledgement into action because what is acknowledgement without action? By donating either your time, monetary means to an indigenous organization each time you hear a land acknowledgement. And not to be too pat, but we have a QR code at the back where if you see it, it will direct you directly to the Ramaytush Land Trust website. And it can find more details about how to participate in this rematriation project and how you can help. Brief business before we get to the heart of the evening. Now is a good time to silence your phones if you have not already. Please do check out our full event calendar on our website at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season coming up, including the event that you are at right now, so you might enjoy what we have in the future. The restroom is behind me. It is available after the event and not during the event for obvious reasons. And it's available to attendees of our event during event time. And if you need to know how to get there, please do ask me, and I am happy to help you. We have books by both of our authors available at the front register. You can find them there. And are they willing to sign them after?
Sure. Yeah, totally.
Awesome. They're going to sign. So we have books at the front register. You can find them there, and they'll sign them afterward. If you've been here before, you've certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you also support the authors who put so much work into making these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. Thank you so kindly. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two folks who are joining us this evening. First, Obi Kaufmann is the author of the California Field Atlas, a #1 San Francisco Chronicle bestseller, The State of Water, Forests of California, Coast of California, and most recently, The Deserts of California, all published by the fabulous Heyday Books. We love Heyday. When he's not backpacking, you can find the painter poet at home in the East Bay, posting trail paintings at his handle Coyote Thunder on Instagram, and you can find a lot more about Obi and his work at coyoteandthunder.com. Please give another hand for Obi Kaufmann. And last but most certainly not least, Manjula Martin is co-author with her father, Orrin Martin, of Fruit Trees for Every Garden, which won the 2020 American Horticulture Society Book Award. Her nonfiction has appeared in The New Yorker, Virginia Quarterly Review, Pacific Standard, Modern Farmer, and many other places. She edited the anthology Scratch, Writers, Money, and the Art of Making a Living. She was managing editor of Francis Ford Coppola's literary magazine Zoetrope, which we also love, and has worked in varied editorial capacities in nonprofit and publishing sectors. She lives in West Sonoma County, and her book, The Last Fire Season, is the reason we are here tonight. Please give a hand for Manjula Martin.
All right. Thanks, Cara. Yeah, let's do it.
Do you have a preference on size? Okay.
None. Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for braving the rain.
We were saying that we should just do like a circle or something. But we won't make you move.
We could, but Car put a cloth on the table.
A round table? Is that what you're doing?
Okay.
Okay.
You're going to read something to
I'm gonna
start,
read
right?
something, yeah.
We have a run of show.
That's what they call it. Hi. I'm going to read something from the book. For those unfamiliar, the book is a memoir. It's a chronology of the 2020 fire season that sort of uses the events of that season to jump off into more about fire and natural history and people's relationship with the land.
Who's read it?
Oh, okay, so you know what it's about.
Yeah.
And throughout that is threaded the story of a health crisis that I had and the story of my garden. So in the book, comes a little bit towards the end of the book. The scene is I'm observing a prescribed fire in oak woodlands up in Healdsburg. I think that's all you need to know. Oh no, the other thing you need to know is that scientifically, fire is a reaction. It's not alive, according to science.
We can debate that.
Yes, we will discuss. A good fire starts small and quiet. Neat rows of flames vein along the ground. When the fire collides with ideal conditions, it blooms, bigger and deeper. Within a few minutes, I see flames combust small bushes on the ground and descend toward lower branches of oak trees. The fire grows taller, as high as my waist, then higher. White smoke blows evenly. There is a perfect slow wind above our heads. On the burning hillside, the air moves up and the wind moves down, and their collision creates vortices of oak leaves, mini fire tornadoes that gather everything from the forest floor and heft it alight. It is easy to see how such a vortex might grow bigger, might plow across rivers and highways, or swell upward into a cloud that creates its own weather. I am still afraid of fire, but I'm also increasingly curious. As the fire grows, I try to use my senses to experience it without imposing any narrative or moral value on what I'm seeing. Sight and sensation, fuel, air, heat, and the ripples of those elemental reactions. Sound, fire is loud. I can hear a bright, unsteady cracking sound coming from deeper in the oaks. Smell, smoke. My body reacts habitually by recoiling. I push it to keep feeling. There is a faint warmth emanating from the forest. Birds circle overhead. In the meadow bordering the oaks, voles scamper from one hole to another. Outside the tree line, a pair of towhees chirps and scrapes at the ground, presumably looking for bugs fleeing the fire. On the hill above vineyards and corralled oaks, eagles swoop. Swallows scatter. A junco hops around erratically in the grass near a burned patch. Displacement behavior. Observing the fire, I am mesmerized, as anyone who's ever spent hours around a campfire has been. But this is far more exciting than an evening by the fireplace. The fire is dynamic. It's on the move, and the people are moving with it, tending it, following it, understanding it. There is something about this fire that feels so familiar to me. Not because of the wildfires, it's more like an early memory of other instinctive interactions I've had with the elements. One thing I hadn't expected, fire is exuberant, it's joyous, it dances. I can see why people joke that all firefighters are secret pyros. It's so much fun. As children, my brother and I used to read a lot of Ray Bradbury books. I was captivated by Bradbury's visions of other worlds and other futures, and later I came to appreciate his sharp sentences, too. At the end of his novel, Fahrenheit 451, there's a scene with a campfire. The protagonist, a former fireman, is on the run from the fascist government. In this world, the job of firemen is to burn books. There are no wildfires or house fires, except the ones the firemen set. When our hero refuses to burn books, he has to flee. After his escape from the city, he falls in with a group of hobos, exiled former professors, whom he initially mistrusts. They light a campfire to warm themselves in the cold night. He watches the fire, at first afraid, then captivated. He hadn't known fire could be a nourishing thing and not the bringer of destruction. He hadn't known it could smell so good. The interior of the forest is hot now, truly on fire. It doesn't look to me like a controlled anything. It looks wild. I turn again to the flames. I focus on a small flame, one that is blooming on some low grass at the edge of the woods. At first, I don't see fire here. The dirt is dirt. But as I watch the ground, I soon see that the dirt is blue, then orange, then it is a flame. The fire appears to me to erupt from the earth. It tremors in the oxygen resting on the surface of the ground. The fire and the soil are so obviously, physically connected. I later described this experience to José Luis Duce Aragues, a prescribed fire training specialist from Spain, who works with Andrea Bustos, the Ecuadorian prescribed fire practitioner at the Watershed Research and Training Center, a good fire-focused organization much farther north in California. José Luis is in my kitchen when I tell him this story. He and Andrea are crashing at our house after leading a training in Sonoma. For us, José Luis is cooking a real tortilla, the traditional egg and potato dish of the Iberian Peninsula. He's using the largest cast iron pan we have and a dozen eggs. The tortilla is so heavy that José Luis, a fireman, a person made of muscle and seemingly no fat, has trouble flipping it. After we eat, it's delicious, I tell him the story of how I saw the fire come from the dirt, and how this moment at the prescribed burn had made me realize that fire is part of earth. José Luis speaks with a Castilian accent, and his eyes are deeply set into his flame-tanned face. He says, yes, this is how it is with fire. Fire will teach you things you thought you already knew about the land. Then he tells me his own story of epiphanic relations with flames. Both José Luis and Andrea have traveled the world making good fire. Once José Luis was doing a prescribed burn in El Cerrado, the grand savanna of eastern Brazil. As soon as he arrived there, he tells me he sensed a sort of mysticism to the scenery. Fire belongs to that landscape, he says, and you can feel it. So one afternoon they were burning. José Luis was alone in the middle of the unit, which is the term for the designated area of a prescribed burn. Things were moving nicely. Then he experienced something indescribable. There was a wall of fire, he recalls, and it was coming slowly toward him. This was a head fire, the type of fire that moves with the wind and the slope, but it didn't act like a head fire. Head fires are hot, large, and fast. This unusual fire approached José Luis slowly. It didn't feel hot. When he moved toward it, it moved back a little. He looked at it, it moved forward, he moved again, and they went on like this. The only way he could describe the feeling he had in that moment, José Luis tells me, was as intimacy. There was connection. It was as though the fire was allowing him to be close to it. The moment of intimacy felt long, but probably wasn't. He heard someone yelling, "Jose, you have to get out of there." He stopped one last time and looked at the fire, and he said, "Okay," and moved slowly away. Now, he says, he feels fire in a different way because there's this relationship. The way José Luis speaks about fire sounds a bit like the way I talk about plants. I ask Andrea and José Luis, who are both experts in the science of fire, if they think fire is alive. And they both reply instantly, "Oh, yes." José Luis says that he feels fire's personhood when fire responds to his touch. When you're using a drip torch, there's a way, he explains, that you can grab fire, and you can tell fire, "Okay, I'm here. I'm bringing you over here. Come with me," like a shepherd. And it chooses to come. Of course, this is very evident with wildfire, Andrea adds, because wildfire looks so alive, but prescribed fire is also alive. You might think you control prescribed fire, but fire will make their own environment. They build their own environment. They decide. It's after dinner now, and Jose Luis and I are on the couch in my living room. Andrea is sitting cross-legged on an armchair. We're all drinking tea. Andrea seems to disappear inside her large hoodie. Throughout the evening, she speaks quietly, but with intensity of purpose, and always with eye contact. When Andrea talks to me about fire, she uses the pronoun they, and I notice that Jose Luis often refers to fire as she. I imagine part of this is the language difference between us. Spanish is both of their first language, and we are talking in English. In Spanish, however, the word incendio, fire, is a masculine noun. I point this out mostly as a humorous aside, but it's an interesting question. If fire is alive, does it have a gender? Jose Luis considers. He probably finds himself referring to fire as she because fire helps give life, a creator, feminine. Andrea offers the word for fire in Quechua, an indigenous language of the Andes. Nina, like a girl. Otherwise, Andrea says, smiling, fire is definitely they, no binary. They are a unique creature. In my first few years of wildfires, I had related to fire as a destructive force, the same way I thought of my body's chronic pain. I had hoped that perhaps my experience of living with pain might help teach me how to live with fire. I must have thought that as a person in pain, I had some sort of advantage in navigating indescribable forces. But on the morning of my first prescribed burn, under the oaks, in a wild intimacy with a small piece of dirt and flame, fire begins teaching me to redefine what it means to be alive at all. I always thought of fire as that hungry monster, gobbling up everything in its path. I hadn't yet understood fire is already part of everything. Fire doesn't consume, it becomes. The Cuban-American feminist artist Ana Mendieta often used elemental materials in her work: blood, water, dirt, fire. Mendieta worked in the 1970s and 80s until she died in 1985 after falling out a 34-story window. Her husband, another artist, was thought by many to have been involved in her death. In her Silhouette series, Mendieta created installations in which she blended her own body into natural settings, embodying a tree, a puddle of mud, a patch of forest full of flowers, etc. In 1976, she made Silhouette en Fuego, a film for which she dug an outline of her body in the dirt and set it on fire. I first saw this image of a woman's silhouette in the earth, burning, many years earlier in an art history course. After the fire behind my house had terrified and attracted me, I recalled this image. The tree that had burned inside itself reminded me of Mendieta's art. Her work was concerned with displacement, identity, and gender. She was displaced from Cuba and her family at age 12. And as an adult, she saw her art practice as a return to a maternal source. Her silhouettes, she wrote, were a dialogue between the landscape and the female body. Today, at the springtime burn that is miles and years away from the fire behind my house, as dirt grows into flame on the land, the image of Mendieta's burning silhouette overtakes my thoughts. I wonder what it felt like for her to climb inside a hole in the ground shaped like her own body, to sculpt the soil around her hips until it took her form, then to step out of it, throw a match behind her, and light it all up.
I love this book so much. Are there plans for an audio version? You could do it.
I did it.
Oh, you did it?
Yeah.
All right. I don't think it's on Audible yet.
It should be on Audible. It's not on Libby, the library one yet.
Oh, very good.
But
you read the whole thing.
Yeah, I did. It was a really intense experience.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. That was a passage that it strikes me as sort of a naturalist might observe the phenomenological world, as opposed to so many of your other passages that are deeply internal.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, well, actually, let me ask you all who read the book, like, at any point, does the author actually explicitly explain the title of the book? I don't think so. Right. So I have some ideas about why it's called The Last Fire Season. What do you all think? Yeah.
It's the constant remain. It's the thing that's going to continue on and on and on.
The last fire season?
Like fire.
It has begun.
Right. This is it.
This is it.
Oh, do you mean like there will be no more fire seasons? It's just fire years now? Like it's just 12-month fire seasons?
I think early on in the book, there was it's like off season starting.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then as time goes on, it's like, oh, this is a perpetual thing. And it will continue on and on.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I do explain it a little bit in the book. I do a little defining. Yeah, you're right.
But the book only takes place over 90 days. In actual season.
That's true. Or wow. I mean, but it goes ahead and backwards years. So many years.
Oh, for sure.
In different memories. But yeah, I mean, the title really refers to, it kind of has a double meaning.
Mm.
There is sort of that common thing that we all know now, which is that fire conditions can occur at any time due to extreme weather, especially in California. And, you know, CAL FIRE, like, no longer uses fire season. I think they say the fire year. I'm not sure how they define it, like what months, but it's the idea that, yeah, fire
Seasonal
season is
fires
every
is
season.
how they define it.
Exactly, yeah.
It's related to the state budget.
Right, yeah, exactly. And then, but for me, it has sort of, the real sort of thrust of that meaning is, I found myself, and I think this is the scene you're talking about in the book, where, like, I'm talking about how it's fire season and it feels totally just all consuming, and everyone's like running around being like, it's fire season, it's fire season, it's fire season. And we find ourselves sort of being like, you know, I can't wait till fire season is over. But that kind of attitude is not one that is really serving us at this point in time. It doesn't acknowledge the fact that fire sort of has always been here and will always be here. And in fact, you know, has more of a right to be here than I do in terms of the land.
You have this extended period in the book where you and Max are thinking about like the romance of van life.
Yeah.
And like, what if we just get out?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, get out. Because you're sort of a climate refugee, really, from Sonoma to Santa Cruz throughout the book. You know, you're sort of like, you know, pinballing back and forth between, you know, the Wallbridge fire, the CZU fire, like,
yeah.
you know.
I don't like to use the word refugee because I feel like I have so many resources that, you know, it's not a fair comparison compared to sort of the global crisis.
Fair point.
But yeah, I mean, we are evacuees. You know, and there's a whole sort of somewhat comedic part of the book where we go visit different people who are selling used trailers, thinking that we could use that as like an evacuation thing, and, you know, then we can just be on our, you know, be at home wherever. In the book, we decided ultimately not to, but what you guys don't know is that later on we actually did buy a trailer. This isn't in the book. We did end up buying a trailer, like, a while later.
Is it in the
No, because it's not within that time frame.
Oh, yeah.
The fact that we bought one isn't in the book.
Right.
In the book, we kind of like talk about it, we have some fights about it, and then we just don't do it. But actually, many months later, we did end up buying one.
Was it like a cute vintage one? Or
Of course. It was like, they call them eggs.
Oh, yeah?
It's like a fiberglass trailer. It's square, but it's like rounded corners, you know? And we towed it with a Subaru Outback.
Yeah.
And,
it's the kind of car I drive, too.
Yeah, they're good cars. 4-wheel drive. And we bought it in Olympia, Washington, and we went up to Olympia and then like road tripped home with it, and quickly realized that we were not trailer people and sold it like a month later.
Trailer people's a thing.
Well, I mean, by that I mean, you know.
I mean, God
we are not practical in that way. Like, I can't even fix my one car, let alone like another car that is also a house. And also, we live on a incredibly narrow, incredibly steep dead-end street, and we physically couldn't actually back the trailer into our yard.
Mm-hmm. Well, thematically in the book, you have this relationship, this idea of home.
Oh, yeah, home and leaving.
Constantly having to leave, right?
Totally.
Whether it's in Santa Cruz and in Sonoma, and this relationship to going between places too, and how it. I mean, this is a thing that I was just really stunned by, how deftly it was attended to in your book, that we have this relationship between physiology and physiography. Like while the earth burns, so does the body.
Right.
And the home then is not a safe place to be. The body is not a safe place to be.
Never has been, really. I mean, that's something I struggle with a lot in the book, is sort of thinking about, the idea of safety and how it's and risk and how those things are very relative, depending on who you are and where you live and your personality and your resources. And, there's definitely sort of that moment where I'm like, oh, wait, I too, like a, American who owns property, who is white and educated and has 2 cars, am going to be subject to this, to climate change also. So that's like a really sort of underlying thing. And I think there's a lot of, it's funny, like in the course of publishing the book, like my publisher's in New York, and most of like big publishing is in New York, Pantheon. Which is an awesome press, Susanna, who's here, has a book coming out with them in a couple of years. But anyway, and like the only question that anyone at the publisher had was like, how could you live there? There meaning California.
Oh, really?
Like, why don't you leave? That was like the number one question I received throughout the process.
Why don't you leave?
Yeah. And so I think that speaks to sort of what you're saying, is this idea of like,
well, there's
what
safety,
is home?
and then there's security, and it's like the investment in security is something that you get to eventually, which I think is in some of the most delicate passages of the book. It's like, why security? Well, we have security in order to pass on, to start a family.
Sure.
And so this idea of like reproduction, which is a deep meditation in the book and a recurring theme, as is fire on the land as a reset for ecological processes, this fertilizing agent.
Totally, yeah.
That shocks the ground with the nitrogen and phosphorus it needs for regrowth to happen in a regular adaptive cycle.
Right.
And yet all of that is deformed now. Deformed in the atmosphere.
Yeah, and I think
the biosphere.
I mean, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about this too. Like, I think that's something that is really important to me. That in the book is like sort of this idea of like playing with this idea of like what I call the reproductive imperative in nature. Like the idea that like the reason why nature is very meaningful for people is because it's all about reproduction. Which on one hand, yes, that is like the font of all life. That is just like literally true, right? But on the other hand, like as a person who doesn't have kids and who had a medical thing happen to me that made it so that I actually can't have kids, like I just don't there's a lot of sort of framing of climate change around like, what about the kids? And like, how will we keep going and reproducing as a species? And I was kind of like, yes, but also like, I'm interested in like, what if we don't count on that? Like, what if nature actually isn't about reproduction? What else is it about?
I mean, I don't have kids either. Right?
Yeah, no. I mean, I think it's really interesting. Like
that choice of if choice actually exists.
Sure.
I've just embarked. I'm in the editing stage of my next book, which is about fire. Apropos, it's going to be called The State of Fire: Why California Burns.
Can you show us the?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. This is the only
printed
copy of
Obi's
the first draft of the manuscript. manuscript. We're in the editing stage now.
Don't leave it here.
So that, you know, I have a number of thoughts that have sort of like, I don't know, drifted to the top, if you will,
Yeah.
of, you know, in their saliency to reveal themselves to me as truths, maybe. And one of them is that California has always burned because of people. Why?
Totally.
California doesn't burn because of trees.
Yeah.
Or plants.
Absolutely.
That's why fire exists. You know.
Yeah, it's always been
the
people.
hydrocarbons offered from the biosphere towards this uniquely terrestrial endemic process called combustion fire.
Right.
You know, like,
Cool.
but in California, it's always been the decisions made or not made by people.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
either way that causes fire.
in 2020,
Yeah.
none of those mega fires were started naturally by like lightning strikes, which still only account for like
Well, there were the lightnings.
CZU.
That was,
CZU,
yeah,
that
I mean, that
crazy
was,
lightning storm. Oh, I remember that
Yeah.
in the East Bay that night.
Yeah, so that's the opening of the book, as you guys know, like, is the lightning storm. But that's actually highly unusual to
Highly
have
unusual.
fires that serious. That
And
are
still
started
only
by
accounts for
lightning.
like 10 to 13%.
It's usually
of all,
mostly PG&E.
which is us.
Yeah, which is people.
I mean, it's decisions
No,
that
it's
that
our
is-
infrastructure,
I
right?
really avoid when I say us, I really avoid in this book using the word we at all.
As did I in my book. Why?
I noticed that.
Yeah, I'm curious.
The first person plural is very lazy.
It's presumptive, I
It's
think.
presumptive.
Yeah.
Exactly. Who are you talking
Like,
about?
yeah,
What are we?
who is we?
Yeah. Are we talking about Sacramento? Are we talking about the Federated Indians of the Great Rancheria? You know, like
Exactly.
who's the we
Yeah.
here in this community?
I agree, it's lazy. It's also very increasingly common, I feel like, in nonfiction to sort of
that's true.
be
It's
like,
true.
we are like this, you know?
Yeah. Or we need to do this, which is political
Sure.
talk,
Yeah.
and I'd like to avoid that. Like,
I'm
I
fine
would
with
like
it,
to- I
but...
would- Well, I would like to engage the realm of ideas in terms of story.
Yeah, like, what are we
That's
really
you've done.
talking about?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, which I think is something that, you know, this book is like a case of me trying to figure that out, you know, like, what are we really talking about? We talk about, like, you know, being a part of nature or being separate from nature and having an effect on nature. Like, what are we actually talking about here? You know?
That's right. Yeah, and we're sort of like clanking, you know, bones on pots when we're using words at all. When
Sure,
we're wrestling with the idea of like, is fire alive or not?
Yeah.
It's like, well, there's biological life. I do a lot of hanging out with scientists,
Yeah,
and I just gave the keynote at the graduate school for ecology at UC Davis last
Oh,
week.
cool.
You know, it was
Yeah.
for the symposium. You know, and it was about, you know, there's biological life,
Sure.
which
Which is real.
is real, right? And then one of the things that I explore in my book is the idea of ecological life.
Tell me about
Like
that.
fire is ecologically alive.
Right.
You know, so it's a grander scale of things that is not because in all ways, and this is sort of a Stephen Pine kind of thing. If you don't know Stephen Pine, he's like sort of like
He's like the fire guy.
he's the fire guy.
He reviewed my book,
Oh, fantastic!
which was terrifying. He liked it.
Oh,
He
very
said, there's not a huge amount of science in this book, but if you like poetic things and metaphors and stories, you will like it. Which I thought is actually very accurate.
Well, he is one. I mean,
He's the real deal.
y'all have some Stephen Pine books here? You probably do.
Probably.
Like,
Yeah.
He's written like 18 books.
And they're
on
all like
fire
this
and all
long.
that. Yeah. Well, like, he's open to this consilient theory as
Totally.
well, bringing in these metaphors.
Yeah.
For example, like bringing the fire into home is embedded in our language as well, with the domos, the Latinized. Well, in Latin, domos is the hearth,
Right.
and
Right.
that's the root of the word domesticate.
Right.
Right, to bring the fire inside.
Which is the hearth fire.
Which
Yeah.
is the hearth fire. It's amazing to me how much of our language, our way of thinking, is wrapped up in fire
Yeah, I mean, well, like,
burning.
It goes that far back, you know? I mean, humans and fire.
It's in us, right? I mean, we've got
Yeah.
the atmosphere, we've got the hydrosphere, we've got the lithosphere. There's nothing called the pyrosphere, technically. It's the biosphere,
Right.
the thing that burns.
Right.
As
It's just
we do,
fire.
so does it, within and without.
Yeah, and I mean, we've evolved together with fire, you know?
That
Some people say,
is
like, you know, some people say, like, we evolved because of fire, because, like, you know, you need fire to cook and for safety and warmth and things like that. But also, like, fire has, as you were just saying, like, changed throughout human history because of humans as well. Like, it's an interdependence. It's not just, like, a cause-effect or cause-effect, you know?
That's right.
I guess I'm pointing at you, thinking you are fire in this scenario.
We have to talk to fire like that,
Yeah.
for sure.
He has a lot of notes.
Yeah, this is notes from your books.
Cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, no, I love looking at that.
I'm thinking of like, well, there's a pyrosymbiosis. I mean, the language play is fun. You know?
Yeah.
In the coevolution, especially in California, which because of the heavy grazing pressure of Pleistocene animals, the floristic province was adapted for plants that could recover quickly from disturbance.
Right.
And then the crush of humanity happens after the last glacial maximum and the flowering of the Holocene, in which we've got these pyrrhic economies form across the state. And I think that's a point that really is not brought home enough, like how much fire was incorporated into agricultural practices of native people for tens of thousands of years in this state. So much so that the composition and structure of arboreal habitats are really only about the age of the Great Pyramids.
Oh, yeah,
California
for sure.
forests are only about 6,000 years old. The way California looks is really something that is, well, it's concurrent also
it's because of people,
climate patterns as well, but because of decisions that people have made.
Yeah.
And I just think that is just that. So we've got two stories going on, don't we? We've got a very, very old story of fire.
Right.
And we've got a very, very new story of fire too. Fire ecology is a very new story.
Yeah.
Like it's only just like within the last 20 years that most fire ecology departments in universities have been divorced from forestry.
Oh, even like more recent than that, I think.
More recent than that,
like
that's right.
A decade or whatever,
Yeah. But to get back to like I think that you brought something into focus for me that was really stunning, which is sort of an untalked about piece of trauma, which is pain.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of pain in this book.
There is.
Beautifully rendered. I think that like, was that like, if I were to imagine like a creative kernel somehow is like to work through something, was that some sort of creative genesis there?
Totally, yeah. I mean, I think, you know, most of you have read the book, but for those who haven't, like, I have chronic pelvic pain, which is the result of an IUD gone wrong, basically. Long story short, it's in the book. And that was something that, you know, was just a coincidence. Like, that happened at the same time that the 2020 fires happened. You know, it actually started around the time of the 2017 fires up in Sonoma County, and then it was ongoing, much like the 2020 fires. And so for me, it really just started in experience, where it was like these two things are happening at the same time, and that was hard and difficult to navigate. But in terms of like telling the story of it, I mean, as I said in that excerpt, like, I think I was curious about whether or not the idea of like, I was entering a moment where I realized I would probably be living with this pain for a very long time. And at the same time, I was having this realization in 2020 that like fires were here to stay, as you said. You know, obviously it wasn't like the first time I'd experienced fires, but 2020 for me was really the year where I was like, oh, this is it. It's going to be like this, you know?
For most of us.
Yeah, for most of us. I mean, that was like a moment, right? And so, I was curious about if there were sort of ways that I could take meaning from those parallel experiences to shed light on the other experience. And I think, originally I had actually been working on like a separate project about my body, and then I was working on a project about like just the lightning fires, and realized at a certain point that they needed to come together. And the reason I realized that is because they both, for me, connected physically in the garden, which is also a big part of this book.
That's where your father is.
Yeah, totally.
Is your father still alive?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
He is. He lives in Santa Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I had also gotten really into gardening when I moved to the Redwoods. And so for me, it was kind of like actually physically interacting with plants and the land that I lived on made me think about the land in a different way. It made me really sort of learn how to like, it's a different kind of attention, right? Mm-hmm. You're paying a particular kind of close attention to it. Mm-hmm. And for me, also, the act of gardening was like the thing that gave me some relief from pain. I don't mean physically, I mean like emotionally and spiritually, I guess. Mm-hmm. So those are kind of like, both of those things are out here. And I'm curious of like, oh, is the pain relating to the fires? Maybe it is, sometimes it isn't. But the place where they really come together is in this very sort of like concrete, thing of like actually the soil,
The gardening, the growing of roots, the intentional manipulation of the earth for, one's own purposes.
Yeah.
That's foreign to me. It's funny. It's like I'm a backpacker and I'm a city dweller. Yeah. And it's like and there's this idea of like, in fact, at one point in the book you talk about my podcast co-host, Greg Saris, who's the chairman of FIGR, Federated Indians of Great Rancheria, which is
the Pomo Nation in Sonoma, yeah.
And they talk, and he talks about. I love that we're sitting here now, like in a very rainy moment,
I know.
And by way of Southern Pomo tradition, it's like winter is the time for story. And so we're here telling stories about the fire season, because regardless of what CAL FIRE does, there is a fire season.
Sure, yeah. As my editor would say, she was like, there's no fire season, but there's a fire season.
Right. It's a political narrative.
Yeah.
But in the old growth redwood forest, which is a place that you don't really go and linger.
You don't really live there traditionally.
You don't live there.
It's not very hospitable to living.
No. Redwoods.
Max is laughing because in the last two storms, like 2 houses in our neighborhoods have been crushed by falling redwoods.
Yeah, windfall's a real thing.
Oh, one was a redwood, one was a Doug fir.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It's usually the Doug fir.
We can get into the botany of that at some other point, but I think the idea that you are gardening in a redwood forest is that's such a willful thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fierce. It's a battle in some ways.
This is my home. You came back. I guess that's my ultimate point. Like this, you're like, this is my home. I'm coming back to these trees. I'm coming back to this place.
Because I grew up around the redwoods. Mm-hmm. And so it did feel sort of like a homecoming when I first moved there because I lived in San Francisco. I was a city person from age 16 to age, I don't know, whenever I moved to Sonoma.
Yeah.
40.
Yeah. But I don't want to leave the pain. I think the pain is very interesting. It's also a prescription. At one point you say, when pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. Which I thought was fantastic.
Which I got from Buddhism, yeah.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
Yeah. It's in most schools of thought that is the case, but yeah.
But it nonetheless, a very prescient notion regarding the navigation through this bottleneck.
Yeah.
You know, that we are in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really sort of, something I'm doing in the book is really trying to sort of actually embrace, like, the darker parts of the experience of living through climate change. I feel like, just as a person who lives in the world, like, there's a lot of, like, you know, we must have hope. We must have hope. And I'm like, yes, but also, like, we have a lot going on here that we need to deal with.
Yes, but that's beautiful.
Yeah, and that is beautiful. And that's kind of like a point.
It's like the inner thing, you know. I mean, you sort of like, towards the end of the book, you're talking about tarot cards. You bring up the Death Tarot card, which is about...
It's not a bad card.
It's not about what it's about.
Yeah.
Which I think is fantastic. And then you move from there to saying from being in pain to being with pain.
Yeah.
Which is an excellent phrase.
Yeah. And I think that
Buddhism too? Did you steal that one?
That was my therapist. Who might be a Buddhist? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, you know, what we're talking about is grief. Right? Like, the sort of being with these hard experiences and hard feelings, whether it's pain, whether it's the knowledge that we have irrevocably altered the climate and the landscape that we live in. There's a lot of grief, you know, and that is hard and also doesn't happen without a lot of love.
There's a lot of grief.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think that, how are we doing on time, Car?
6 more.
This is probably
6 more minutes?
Yeah.
So I was inspired by a couple of images towards the end of your book. Now, I mean, we're talking about grief, we're talking about death, we're talking about pain, we're talking about these things that collectively sort of account for this trauma, especially when written on the land, and how to get right with it, if there is getting right with it, or what that could possibly mean.
Right.
You know, as we sort of like use these words, the best words we've got.
Yeah, well, and those terms are being redefined constantly, right?
Right. And I also, it was interesting that you brought up gender, the gender of fire, which is so. Man, I can't help but think like it's worthy to examine, almost to sort of point out a certain absurdity, right? Because because between like ecologically living things, because sex is wholly biological as a function in the evolutionary history of the world.
Yeah.
It's an invented thing that happened at one point in the evolution.
And like nature breaks that rule all the time, as I'm sure you know. Like,
it's a very fair point. It's a very fair point.
And there's a bit in the book where I sort of talk about that a bit, you know, plants behaving in ways that are not about sort of sex and biology.
Oh, and you know who gets at that is, you know, and I think like, you know, here I am.
You have Rilke there.
Yeah, I got some, well, I'm gonna have to bring
this is
up
good. He has Rilke, Robin Wall Kimmerer.
Yeah, the democracy of species.
I feel like I'm in very good company.
Very good. Very good. Like when I first read Braiding Sweetgrass, I had a really hard time with it, and I think
because of the gender stuff.
Well, I think that's partially, you know, identifying as a guy of particular racial persuasion, you know, gender disposition, you know, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I encountered the deep feminine in a way that was like that felt like a gelling of energy that I had to like push through some sort of membrane towards like great things, and the great things were hidden in the language she used. At one point, she talks about, and this is an excerpt from Braiding Sweetgrass, The Democracy of Species, when she says, you know, there's this word in her language group that is something like pahuhi, which is the force of mushrooms at night to rise from the ground, right? Which doesn't exist in the English.
Cool.
And it's almost like there needs to be a new word that's not hope, that isn't trauma, that isn't pain.
Yeah.
And I wrote this morning, and if I could share it, it's pretty quick.
Yeah.
But with your position, something like it might occur in the book, because there's a point here to be made, although we don't exactly know the point yet. What would be the word for stewarding death? How could there be such a word? Can it exist? What would it be shaped like? Perhaps if it were a song or a lyric, Orpheus alone would be able to sing it. Stewarding death means affirming life. When singing of death, Orpheus does not sing of death, but makes a space for horror and absurdity. Eurydice, a little girl playing with fire in the rain, knows the pyronatural history of women and questions how one does not light themselves on fire to heal the world. The gifts of demonic Dionysus include the madness of grace and a host of other sweet and stinging truths that don't care about when you live, only that you do so.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for inspiring it, right? So the pyronatural history of women, which I think is...
I was actually thinking about reading that part tonight, and I changed my mind.
Well, it's jam-packed with these images and historical examples.
Yeah. I mean, we go way back, right?
We go way back.
Yeah.
And at one point, there's a little girl playing with this burning stick in the rain, which is...
Yeah, a pomo girl, actually, yeah.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Relationship to fire there. I don't remember the specifics of...
It was a thing at, now I'm going to forget what it's called, the Heron Shadow Farm, up near where I live in Sonoma County, which is like a project, I think, technically owned by the Nature Conservatory. It was land that some folks gave back in their will to the local indigenous folks, and they're doing like a kind of like, almost like a commune project. Like they live there and they're farming, and they also have like educational space, and they have like what they call like respite space for other Native people to just come and like have respite from whatever they need to have respite from. So that was an event they had with the Basket Weavers Association about fire. Yeah.
Okay.
I wasn't there present at it, but I read reports.
Yeah.
There's a little girl whose name is Fire. Her mom named her Fire.
Her mom named her Fire. Oh, wow. I missed that detail.
Badass. Should we get a question?
I suppose we should. I mean, I feel like I have a great more things to talk to you about. But yeah, let's go on to questions. You all have been so patient.
Does anyone have any?
Does anybody have any thoughts? Yeah.
Can I be there when you talk more about things?
Sure. Maybe we'll start a podcast.
That's great. Well, we should. Can we do this again in the fall, Car?
Oh yeah, when his book comes out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Shoot me, you know.
Okay, that's good. We'll be in touch. Yeah. So that's going to be an ambitious tour for me as well. It's the 6th book. It's like the wrapping up of all of the
elements,
stuff.
but yeah.
Well, it's California both in like space and time as far as like elements are concerned. I mean, space and time. I was thinking. You bring this up at one point in the book. You're talking about all the different scenes, CENE, right? Like all of the different names we have for right now.
Right.
And I looked it up, and there's a paper that is really well referenced in nature.org that is 80 different names.
It has all
of them.
The Pyrocene, Thulucene, Holocene, I love it.
80 of them. And there's a corresponding number of spheres.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Of course there is. Yeah.
Of course there is. Everything from the mycosphere to the technosphere, like all of these binding agents across space and time, which is fascinatingly futile and yet revealing. It's like one of my great criticisms of just relying on the biological sciences to tell this story is that is inherent in sort of cognitive biases that we all carry around like suitcases, but I think like so many biologists are, I'm only going to describe this one thing. I cannot break this. And we don't want them breaking.
No, because they need that. Yeah. I mean, that was kind of one of the reasons why the book it's fairly colloquial. Like, most of the places that I go to and the people who I interview are places who, like, are somehow within my sphere of socially or, you know, geographically or in some ways, because I wanted it to really sort of not feel like it's like, as a joke, I didn't want it to be like, now I am doing journalism, you know.
I see.
Because that is only one way of telling stories. And as we are learning with fire, like, a lot of these stories, you know, a lot of these histories aren't written. And a lot of history is not written. And, you know, in things that are written, like the people who write the archives are only certain people, and only certain archives survive, you know. And so really trying to sort of think about other ways of legitimately surfacing these narratives. And really sort of giving equal power to, like, a conversation as to a study that I read, you know, in this book, which I try to do.
Yeah, from what I glean from what Greg has told me about Greg Sayers again, placeandpurpose.live, if you want to see our conversation.
Podcast.
Yeah.
You're talking to the Shelterwood people.
We're talking.
That's very exciting.
Yeah, next week. That's super fun. The idea of dreaming is what supplants writing in oral traditions of many indigenous cultures across the California floristic province. This idea that it's transmitted outside of one's own sort of embodied,
like, rubric,
conscious and subconscious. Yeah, that's right. Rubric is a great word for that. The verb dreaming meaning something different, where you leave your own perspective.
Right.
You don't dream about yourself. You dream about the world. It can't happen awake or sleeping.
That's cool.
It's a technology that is lost on us who are so fascinated by the shining rocks that we look at, you know, that act as mirrors of our own self-conscious. The algorithm is that perfect, you know. You know? Yeah. So, you know.
I like that. I mean, there's definitely a lot of dreaminess in this book. Like, it's important. It's important to actually honor that stuff.
It is. It is. Honor that stuff. Honor that. Well, that gets back to the transitory, to the security. You know, I'm giving a keynote next month in Los Angeles to the Green Homes Building Association of California, right? So it's like these are architects and builders of 21st century homes at the wildland urban interface.
Okay,
right?
Yeah, but fancy ones, right?
Well, the idea is that it's not supposed to be. Like, we shouldn't be building houses like we build them in Iowa. You know?
No.
Like, no. The codes must change, and these are the people who are going to change the codes.
That's interesting.
You know, towards a more, like, if we're going to do this, let's realize that fire is here now. We're welcoming this back in. Even the mega fires, this is another thing that's a real thing from my research. Like, over the past 25 years, it's not like something imposed on us. These are decisions that have been made to let fires in the backcountry burn and to spend less resources to get away from the 10 a.m. rule, which dictated fire policy across the United States Forest Service for 100 years, which is like every fire out by 10 a.m. the next morning.
All fire bad.
All fire bad. And eventually it'll just go away. Gifford Pinchot said that. Like that's what science was.
Oh my God. Can I tell a really random anecdote about the Pinchots?
Please.
So apparently his, I think, granddaughter, Nancy Pinchot, like, read my book.
Oh, cool.
Which was just interesting. And she was like, But the very interesting thing about that is that they live in a town that like my cousin happens to live in, and my cousin is like a activist and has always been. He was very prominent in like AIDS activism in New York in the 80s, and then he like moved to the country in Pennsylvania, and it happens to be that he lives in the town where like Gifford Pinchot has had land forever, and his family lives there, and they have gone through a process of actually like doing like a land back project of some of the Pinchot land to the local Native American tribes there, and have entered into this like really interesting, like lengthy sort of reparation, not quite reparations, but like what's it called?
Something like that.
An active repair. Rather.
Sure.
Yeah.
Certainly justice minded.
Which is interesting. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
I know.
What a wonderful story.
I know.
Of course she's read your book. She must have read your book.
Well, so the thing that she said in response to the book was that she really sort of was talking about how like she feels like there needs to be what she called like a re-spiritualization of people's relationship with land. And she found that, I guess, she saw that at places in my book, which is interesting because like I definitely like squirm at sort of anything that seems kind of like woo-woo in that way, but she's not wrong. Like it really is sort of about reestablishing that kind of a relationship, I think.
That's right. We have to give, we have to be generous with the words, as clumsy as they are.
Yeah.
I think we understand that there is like a transcendence and there's immanence. It's like this is in the body, even if it's spiritual. But yeah, I'm like you. I heard Fran Lebowitz last week say, "I don't believe in anything you have to believe in." Which
I believe in Fran Lebowitz.
That was fantastic. Yes, indeed. I believe in Fran Lebowitz too.
Does anyone have any other questions? We could just do this for a while. Yeah. How are we doing on time?
I think that's probably a good note.
Okay.
End on.
Fran Lebowitz, be
There's a
back.
question right there.
Oh.
So
Purple beer.
there was a term in the book you introduced me to, and I can't remember what it is. The like feeling of nostalgia.
Solastalgia.
So nostalgia.
Okay, so I don't know if
Perfect.
there's a
Great
question
question.
here or not, but I'm going to ask you as a philosopher now. So we moved here in July of 2020 from Chicago after we experienced the tornadoes
Right.
in the winter of 2019 and said never again.
Right.
And so we moved here, and like the week after, it was just orange for a month. And my husband has chronic asthma and like cannot be in this sort of environment. So we had the entire house sealed. Literally, the windows are not openable now. And, there are no openings into the house so that he can breathe. And it just sort of seems like the last 4 years of our lives have just been this constant nostalgia for a time where things were not this bad. And so I wonder, like, I think it was Ghosh who you said
Yeah, Amitav Ghosh, the author.
put us in this, or sort of explained this situation of like, we keep ourselves busy so that we don't have to deal with the crushing doom that is our daily lives.
He calls like the current era the Great Derangement.
Right.
Which is sort of, we're just not looking at the thing that is the thing that obviously we should all be looking at, which is climate change. Yeah.
So what? Now what?
Well, solastalgia and nostalgia both have their etymological roots in pain and the wound. Right?
Yeah, neuralgia. I don't know if those are related. I don't know what algia. That's probably just like of or something. I don't know. Not good at the Latin, but yeah. I mean, that's I think what I love about the phrase solastalgia, and I'm forgetting, but there's actually a new phrase that is even more interesting. I'll try to remember and send it to you.
Yeah, it's the delicious
it is?
pain. No, I'm trying to think of solastalgia. It's the remembrance that inspires this sort of like quality of pain that we can't help but be drawn towards, to remember a place that
Our
may
place.
not have ever existed at all. I mean, did it exist?
Well, that's like a whole other book.
That's a whole other book.
But no, I mean, like solastalgia is like that idea of being like nostalgic for the place that you live having been physically changed while you're still there,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah. It's supposed to nostalgia, which is like a very retrospective feeling, right? And I think there's even some sort of like, there should be a word for the projecting forward of that. I'm sure there is, but I don't know what it is.
I think about that a lot too, like fire in the future. Like the book is called The State of Fire, which is based on my next book. You know?
Yeah, I like it.
Because the state of water and the state of fire, it's like but also like physically, chemically.
Right, the state.
Fire exists. I mean, I want to push this metaphor a little bit. It's like fire exists as a solid inside of the color green or inside of lignin, right? That's where it exists in the future. Trees in California are made of fire waiting to burn.
Yes, yeah.
Like that strikes me as something that...
Yeah, and the sun's in there too.
These aren't trees. You can look at a forest, you kind of see fire, right?
I mean, I think, I don't have an answer to like what now, obviously. But I think very much like this book, and also I think your books are like in the process of having that conversation, of looking for that, And I think for me, part of it is actually understanding that there is no answer and being okay with that in some ways, and understanding that like in this process of like trying to iterate and trying to figure out what to do and how to live and how to feel and think, like that's actually where the cool shit happens. Like that is where power and action really happen.
The right questions. Your book is so important. I mean, one of the reasons why I wrote my book is because it's very difficult to find books on California fire.
That's true.
You'd think people would be writing them.
You would think.
But they're really not.
Yeah.
And I wonder what you would say to like the idea that, I mean, I wrote this book to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, no, completely. That's what this book is for me. And I'm still doing it. I'm still trying to figure it out. And I think that's like, that's like for me the place where I find something that could be akin to hope is like in that process.
Well, what's next now? You were talking about maybe a novel? Would you go back to fire? Would you go back to California land? What would you do? What's next? Can you give us a sneak?
Well, we were joking in the car on the way here that like the next book is The Last Atmospheric River. But it's not. Or The Next Atmospheric River. My next project will be a novel. I'm actually have been trying to write a novel for many, many years and keep getting distracted by nonfiction books. So I'm pretty firm on this one. But some of the same themes are cropping up for sure, I think.
Do you have the contract yet?
No. With a novel, you have to write it first.
Oh.
Yeah.
Just in my little
Which
heyday
sucks.
bunker.
Yeah. Because in nonfiction, you get, you can sell a nonfiction book on proposal, and then you get a little chunk of money, and then you can go write the book or whatever. But with a novel, you have to actually, because how do you pitch a novel? Like someone has to read it. You have to read it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if you don't have a track record.
Exactly. Yeah.
Doing something.
Yeah. But no, the novel, there are definitely some themes of sort of like women's relationships with each other and with landscapes, solitude versus not solitude. There's also probably some stuff about art in a time of rising fascism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually pottery, so it is art of the earth. That's all I know.
That was a nice tease.
Yeah. Coming in like 2029 or something.
Oh boy. All right. We'll be on the lookout for that.
Thank you. But in the meantime, State of Fire coming October?
Fall. Yeah, we don't have a pub date yet.
Fall 2024. Cool. During fire season.
Yes, that's right. And Hades' 50th anniversary. So.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Nice.
It's been 50 years since the publication of The Ohlone Way. You might have some copies of that if you haven't read Malcolm Margolin's book.
I read it in school.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's a good school.
Grew up in Santa Cruz.
Oh, I see. Very good. Right on. In high school?
Must have been, yeah.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you all so much
Thank
for
you.
joining us.
Can you keep it going for Manjula and Obi? Thank you both so much. Thank you. Thank you for your considered reading of Manjula's book, and thank you for writing it and sharing it with us. Thank you all for being here. I am just here to very briefly remind you that we have books by both of these artist-writers at the front register. You can find them there. They will sign them, I have been told, so you can ask them for that. If you need anything else, do let me know, and if not, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, Manjula, that was fun.
That was cool.